it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Dufflin Lammers. Dufflin Lammers is a relationship and recovery coach, writer, and speaker. She works with women who are struggling with fears of abandonment and or fears of intimacy. She empowers her clients to embrace self-responsibility, clarity, and the security of abundance. Her approach is client-led and non-judgmental. She combines her training in Tantra, attachment repair, and recovery coaching to teach essential skills that move clients toward healthy relationships with themselves and others. She lives in Paris, France, and works remotely with clients all over the globe. She was published in outlets as varied as the LA Times and Iowa Women. Her essay, Tinder in Paris, won a silver medal in the love story category for the 12th annual Solus Awards 2018. Lammers co-edited the spoken word anthology Chorus with Sal Williams 2014. Lammers has appeared on Russell Simmons' Def Poetry Jam on HBO, and her one-woman show Discovered was a 2017 Duende Distinction Award nominee in its debut at the Hollywood Fringe Festival. She is now at work on her memoir. So today she will be talking to us today about all things sex and recovery. So welcome, Dufflin. We're so glad you're here. Please take it away.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kelly and Carrie, for holding space with us. And I'm super excited to be here with you all. I love Valentine's Day. I feel like Valentine's Day is really just all about love. And as a relationship and recovery coach, for me, it's all about sex, love, and dating. And so I'm going to share a presentation with you today about sex in recovery. So let's talk about that. Sex in recovery. What is this about? First, I want to approach just by saying, okay, what is sex? And then I want to talk about body positivity equals sex positivity. And then I want to talk about anorexia versus addiction. And I'm talking specifically in the area of sex here. So number one, what is sex? A lot of us think, okay, it's a man and a woman in bed having intercourse. But is that all? If penetration didn't happen, was there sex? I feel like this limited definition of sex can be really damaging in so many ways. First of all, if we don't qualify something as sex, we may not be inclined to use protection, which is important for our sexual health. Many times sex becomes a problem inside a relationship when there are unspoken expectations. When, how often, how much, what kind, with whom, all of these kinds of things, right? So it can also become a problem when it's weaponized in a power struggle. And what I mean by that is many times in couples, we may withhold sex in order to attempt to control or manipulate our partners. So let's define sex. What do we mean by that? What if there's a broader definition of sex that includes not only every type of intercourse, but also outercourse, and that can include any exchange of pleasure and connection on an intimate level? How does that sound? So does the narrower definition get in the way of enjoying sex fully? Possibly. I think probably. What we see in media isn't reality. And when we realize, for example, only 30% of women reliably climax with only penetration, it kind of puts it into perspective. So, there's a lot of facts like that. And I think a lot we can learn from just examining a little bit deeper, what is sex and what is it for you, right? Some studies have shown that those who found it necessary to redefine sexuality, such as those who identify with LGBTQ, BDSM, kink, ethical non-monogamy, they might be more likely to have peak experiences, or what has been called magnificent sex. Studies also show older adults enjoying sex into their 70s and 80s and beyond. So I don't know if any of you remember, Arrested Development was a sitcom. And one episode showed that it was the oldest son, I think. He decided to go into business basically as a pimp. And so he brought this prostitute into the office because he thought it was going to make his employees more productive and happier, right? And it was working. But the funny thing was that behind the scenes, he showed the men going in to see the prostitute, and they were sitting down and they were talking about their feelings, right? because what we all want is to feel seen and to feel known. And this is why sex is an attachment behavior, because it's really about connecting. So what does it mean to you? And I invite you to just take a moment and explore that. What has it meant to you? What would you like it mean to you? Right? And can we expand that definition of what sex is in a way that might actually lead us towards more satisfying sex lives? We've become really afraid of our animal nature. And I think in Western culture, especially, we deny that animal nature to the extent that we deny ourselves and we limit our pleasure. Osho, and this is the Tantra side of my training, Osho talks about when you condemn something, then you condemn that part of yourself. It becomes unconscious. You condemn it so much that you yourself become afraid of knowing it, that it exists somewhere within you. You create a barrier and you throw everything that is condemned by you beyond the wall, and then you think you can forget about it, but it remains your master, even while you deceive yourself that it is no more. So this is where shadow work becomes really important, right? And parts work. And this is part of what I do with my clients. I use something called Ideal Parent Figure Protocol, which is attachment based, but it's also about looking at those different parts of ourselves that we have denied, right? Or that we're hiding from, that we don't want to look at. And who can be surprised when we seek pleasure and release in other places, in food, in drugs, in shopping, when we're denying that part of ourselves? And what is healthy sex? Okay, so how do we define what feels good for us in a society that tells us what we ought to like, or what is appropriate, or even what healthy means? So I want to talk about the 4 cornerstones of intimacy. First one is self-knowledge. Then we have comfort and connection, responsibility with discernment, and empathy with emotion. So self-knowledge, we hear people talk about losing themselves in a relationship. In order not to do this, we need to know who we are in the first place. What do we like? What feels good to us? What feels safe to us? And then we can come from an authentic place and set boundaries that serve our wants and needs. I don't know if any of you remember, there was a film called Runaway Bride with Julia Roberts. And I love this. I love this movie. And I often use it as an example because she's being interviewed by Richard Gere, right, who plays a journalist who's come to talk to her, and she's about to get married again, but she's left men at the altar 4 or 5 times. And somehow, he's heard about it and he's come to see what's going to happen this time. And so he's interviewing her and he's following her. And she has this big revelation and she says, I don't even know what kind of eggs I like. So finally, towards the end of the movie, she sits down at the diner and she has the woman cook her some fried eggs and some poached eggs and some scrambled eggs. And she sits there and she tries them all. And the funny thing is, at the end, she says, you know what? I don't like eggs at all. But she figures it out. And this is recovery. Comfort and connection. Okay, so many of us who grew up in dysfunctional families crave normalcy. And it takes diligence and discipline to create that. Sometimes we're also seeking intensity at the expense of intimacy. We might fear limiting our options, but we can also just learn to pause and listen and respond. That intensity at the expense of intimacy is a thing that comes up often, right? We meet somebody and we have that boom, that sort of a reaction. That's something to really be careful with. When we have that kind of a reaction, when we have that intensity, it's not the same thing as intimacy. It doesn't mean that they're your soulmate necessarily, right? Intimacy is something that we earn, something that grows with trust and with time. It's something that we create and we cultivate, right? Responsibility with discernment. So we speak our truths with our partners, even when we fear it will be hard for them to hear. When we don't, we might end up acting out. And we don't avoid conflict. We can learn to stay connected in a conflict. And this is how we develop that trust in ourselves and in others. I feel like this developing trust in ourselves is a really big thing. And we can begin to take small risks. When we take those sort of small calculated risks, which every time someone comes to a recovery meeting or gathering and and they take the risk to share what's on their heart, they're taking one of those small risks. They're learning controlled vulnerability. And that's what we need to learn in order to be able to have that kind of trust, so that when one of our primary attachment figure, in whatever sort of relationship paradigm we're in, has an opinion that's different than ours, and we have some kind of a conflict, and we need to tell somebody something, even though we're afraid that they're not going to like what we have to say. We've practiced emotional intimacy before. We've taken that risk before. And every time we take that risk, the window of tolerance grows a tiny, tiny bit. So that's what we want to do, is just keep taking small risks, and then take bigger ones and bigger ones. And it doesn't have to be, miles bigger every single time. You don't have to go from 0 to 60, right? You can just go from 0 to 5 miles per hour. Empathy with emotion. So this is about our ability to experience another person's emotions without making it mean something of our own or becoming defensive. So, what it's like when someone's really listening to you and you can feel that they feel you. That's what I'm talking about, right? When they're not sitting there waiting for their opportunity to speak. And this is where active listening is a great skill in relationships. It's something actually that I learned as an actor, what my acting teacher called full body listening, where you're facing the person, you're giving them eye contact, you're really focused, you're really present, you're actually listening. And sometimes it helps if you struggle with this, because some of us do, and that's okay. It's fine to struggle with some of these things, right? That's why we're talking about it. So if you struggle with this, try watching their mouth move and imagining you're making your mouth move the same way. So imagining that you're wording the things that they're saying. And that's one way to sort of focus. And it's also very sexy. I'm not responsible for what happens if you try it. Okay, so let's talk about body positivity and sex positivity. So this is a quote from Emily Nagoski, and I love her book, Come As You Are. She says, exposure to media that reinforces body self-criticism increases body dissatisfaction, negative mood, low self-esteem, and even disordered eating. So she gave an example about a study that was done in Fiji, where these people had not been exposed to modern media, and a scientific team went in and they showed them things like 90210 and Instagram and some modern media like this. And lo and behold, the natives began showing signs of negative mood, low self-esteem, and disordered eating. And here's the really scary thing, y'all. 15 years later, the effect of that exposure was still evident. Doesn't go away. Can't unsee it. When we look at things that make us feel worse about our bodies, it interferes with our sexual well-being. Period. Even when we've been taught to believe that feeling worse about our bodies will motivate us to, quote unquote, improve. I think a lot of us use that, right? Like, I'm going to put a picture of this gorgeous woman in a swimsuit on my desktop so that every time I look at it, I'll be reminded, of what I could look like if only I exercised more and lost weight. Let's not shame ourselves for having these negative opinions about ourselves. That only causes more stress. But instead, we can notice when we're doing it and do something else, make a new choice. So embodiment is a really important part of this. It's just a big component in recovery, I feel. And this is about being with the sensations in the body. So many of us have been through difficult life experiences that might have necessitated defensive measures like dissociation from the body, or that fight, flight, or freeze response. And getting back into our bodies slowly and in a way that's safe for us is one way to heal. There are lots of different practices that can be part of that. Tantra was it for me. For some people, it's trauma-informed yoga, somatic experiencing, ecstatic dance, breath work, dynamic meditation. There's so many different things out there. They're really wonderful for embodiment. Nonlinear movement is another one. So as we move forward, we can just begin to track and name the sensations and impulses in the body and learn what is right for us. And what does that look like? Really tracking the sensations in the body. So sometimes I'll do this with a client. I work remotely, but I can see, something just goes across their face. And I'll say, what was that? What did you feel just now? And she'll say, when you said that thing, I just I felt shame. And I'll say, can you tell me where that is in your body? Where does that live in your body? And she'll point to where it is in her body, and that's all it is. It's just that noticing. We can begin to just track it. And then when it comes up again, we'll say, shame, right? Which is one that comes up often. This is part of our recovery, because in order to truly have intimacy, we must be present, body, mind, and spirit. So one great exercise is to take off all your clothes and stand in front of a mirror and make a list of everything that you see that you like. I know it's a scary thought, right? And it might be a challenge, when you first try it, but I suggest that you do this more than once. If you have significant trauma, perhaps consider doing it with the guidance of a trained professional. When you begin to treat your body with respect and affection, the affection and respect that it deserves, you'll approach sex with confidence and with joy and just a new perspective. So number 3, sexual anorexia versus sexual addiction. Those of us in recovery are often all or nothing kinds of people, right? So all addiction is about extremes. I want to talk a little bit about both sides of that coin. So often we have a fear of intimacy or a fear of abandonment, but they're tied to one another. They're really two sides of the same coin. Sexual addiction is a syndrome that manifests in destructive, often painful sexual behaviors born of severe distress in early childhood due to neglect or emotional, physical, or sexual abuse. And even if you don't identify as a sex addict, you may have engaged in problematic sexual behaviors, especially when you were in your dysfunction, right? When you were using those maladaptive coping mechanisms, those defensive behaviors. Taking a closer look at exactly who you want to be as a sexual creature in recovery gives you the opportunity to be empowered around your sex life, to make choices that benefit you, to allow you to be the juicy, delightful, erotic, wild you that you are. And often a person who's love avoidant has a stronger fear of intimacy and may develop sexual addiction. This is about acting out. So let's take a look at some of the characteristics of sexual addiction. It originates from a shame-based perspective, like most, if not all, addiction. It takes advantage of others, compromises one's integrity, confuses intensity with intimacy. We talked a little bit about that. Reenacts trauma, requires dissociation, so distance from the self, and that can be both mentally and physically. Is fixated on the past or the future, usually an idealized past or future. So this comes up sometimes holding on to an experience or a person from many years before that we put them on a pedestal, or we make it like so ideal and so perfect that it can never be lived up to. Relies on self-loathing and self-destruction, is about power and control over another. So this is not about, like BDSM, there's consent, right? And that's not about power over another person. That's exactly what consent is there to eliminate. Is covert and manipulative, serves to avoid feelings at all costs, creates tolerance. You need more stimulation to receive the same result, requires compartmentalization. It's rigid, it's routine, it's without meaning. And when I say without meaning, it's also that spiritual connection, the eroticism that comes from depth. So sexual anorexia is one way that many will address some of the signs of sexual addiction. We go into that, this sort of like the pendulum swings, right? From the addiction, the all, to the anorexia, the nothing. So this is sort of that idea that we believe if we just shut the door on sex, we're recovered. And so this is acting in. For someone with sexual anorexia, sex feels unsafe or too vulnerable. It feels really overwhelming, and oftentimes they don't engage at all. They may also have anxiety around sexual behavior, and this can be related to a deeper disorder such as anxiety or depression. For somebody who's really struggling with this, there's no talking about sex even many times. There's no sexual connection, no sexual activity. And if they're engaging sexually, they might also be dissociating from the body while having sex. They may say, I don't even think about sex. But imagine how much effort it takes to not think about this very natural, very powerful human impulse. And this can happen for those of us who have a strong fear of intimacy, and also for those of us who have a strong fear of abandonment. If we never let anybody in, they can't hurt us, right? The problem is that we're also denying ourselves a basic human need. So am I saying that you should run out and have sex with the first person you're attracted to? Or even that you must have sex in the way we traditionally think of it? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's worth investigating. What is sex for you? And who are you, as a sexual creature? What's your bedroom persona, right? And what's right for you? It's worth getting smart about your body and protecting it. I'm saying it's worth treating your partners well and expecting the same. I'm saying it's worth building positive relationships. It's worth making sexual health a part of self-care. And we did recently at She Recovers. I was hosting Mondays in January. And so we did 5 weeks where we focused on the 5 functions of secure attachment. And each week we did a challenge. And one of the challenges, if you remember, was self-pleasure. And this is one way to begin to explore that as well. It's hard to be able to tell somebody else who we are and what we want as a sexual creature if we just don't know, if we haven't taken the time to explore our own bodies and to discover what feels good for us. So this is absolutely a part of self-care. So here I want to move into from functional to optimal, right? What is magnificent sex? This is a new book that's out, which I'm really enjoying reading. And in this, I learned that some sex therapists will say that magnificent sex involves communication. Who can deny that? Focus on pleasure rather than performance. Love this from a tantric perspective, absolutely. Openness, right? Variety, yes, especially for women. That's even more important for women. There was a study in the New York Times a couple of years ago that talked about how women require more variety than men. Focus on non-genital pleasure, intimacy. And what do we mean by intimacy, right? So obviously in the context of sex, we're talking about emotional intimacy. Relaxation. This is huge. If we could just relax, and this is why embodiment, again, is so important, right? And that body positivity is so important, because if I'm sitting there worrying about, is the person seeing my cellulite? I'm in my head, I'm in anxiety, I'm not relaxed, and I'm not going to enjoy myself, at least not to the extent that I could. Anticipation. And this is a wonderful thing also that Emily Nagoski talks about in Come As You Are, context and anticipation. And there's also, the way the brain reacts to liking something is not the same as the way the brain reacts to expecting, right? So for example, when we know that we're going to open a present, right? Our brain is already reacting before we go and open the present. It's the same with sex, right? So anticipation is a big part of it. And how can we cultivate that, with our partners? Affection, orgasm, yay, and ecstasy. So this is where we're headed, right? This is what magnificent sex looks like. And who doesn't want magnificent sex? I don't know, maybe somebody doesn't. You'll tell me about it if that's you. But I feel like we all deserve to have that kind of fulfillment and that kind of present, available body awareness. So I want to offer you a free sexual health inventory. You can go to my website and download that. I'll put the link in the chat as well. It's just a really simple way to begin to expand your awareness. Super easy. It's like 10 questions that you can ask yourself and see, where are you at? And it's a really, I think, gentle way to begin to explore that for yourself. So, all right. I'm at about 30 minutes here. I want to hear from you. I think some of the best information always comes out just by surprise and organically. So I really want to hear from you and hear your questions. Let's have some discussion. Sex in recovery. What do you got to say? All right. So I'm going to stop my screen share. Kelly.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you so much, Dufflin. Oh my gosh, I just learned so many things just for myself. So interesting. Things I just never knew about, but seem so like intuitive when I'm thinking about them, like intimacy being mind, body, spirit. Like, why had I never thought that before? Of course it is. Of course it is. And it makes total sense. But I had never heard it said like that. So thank you for that wonderful presentation. So let's get into some questions. Let me see what we have. Okay. When you were speaking about empath with emotion and that being kind of difficult, how do we do that without taking anything personally or making it mean something? What are your tips?
Ooh, great question. Empathy with emotion without making it mean something or taking anything personally. Well, the first thing I'll say about that is it takes practice. Right? It's a process, like most things in recovery. It's a process. So we do it by being gentle with ourselves and not giving up. If we try it once and then, and we realize, oh, I'm doing the thing again. Like when we see ourselves taking something personally again, and we're like, oh, I'm taking it personally. We realize that. Can we first say, Dufflin, Kelly, whoever is asking the question, aren't you cute? You're so adorable. I love you so much. Of course you're taking it personally because that's your conditioning. You're going to the pool of pain. This is what we do. We're humans, right? And love yourself through that moment. You've had the courage to acknowledge that you're taking things personally. So bravo, you're on the right path. And empathy with emotion, not taking it personally. What was the other part of the question again?
And not making it mean something. Like we can take it in, maybe take it personal, maybe make it mean something that it doesn't necessarily mean.
Right. Yes. And as humans, we're meaning making machines. So it's what we do, right? Like that, but this is what I do. So I feel like when it comes to that, making meaning out of things, it's really just about staying present and being with what is. So one of the tools that has worked really well for me is Byron Katie's 4 questions. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that, right? It's just about inquiry. So when we notice it, I'm like, oh, I'm feeling really bad around this thing. What is it that I'm feeling so bad about? Okay, what's the thought? What's the thought that's going through my head? And then how do I feel when I think that thought, right? And then is it true? That's the inquiry, right? You're asking, like, is it actually true? Most times it's not. Most times we're in the past or we're in the future, right? So we're in the past and it's creating sadness, or we're in the future and it's creating anxiety. And then who would you be without that thought? What would you feel like without that thought? And when you can see, oh, well, like I'd be happy, joyous, and free, and I'd be awesome, and I'd be having a great time with this person here. It makes it a lot easier to just drop that thought and the meaning that we have made out of whatever's going on. And the other thing I want to say about that is just to see if we can, when we see someone else behaving in a certain way that maybe we don't like, can we respond to the need instead of reacting to the behavior? and making it mean whatever we make it mean, or taking it personally. Just respond to the need. And if we can just pause and ask ourselves, what does that person need right now?
Wonderful. Wow. I never thought of it like that. That's so important, responding to the need and not the behavior. I feel like that would save me a lot of frustration. So definitely useful.
Me
Awesome.
too, when I remember to do it.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
That's the thing, like retraining our brains. And Veronica Valley, who we had on the other week, she also went through a segment about how nothing is personal. Literally nothing is personal. And that's like one of her biggest pieces of advice that she tells people in recovery, because we're so conditioned to think everything is about us, or everything is personal, or that we must react to everything. So awesome. All right. So our next question is, how do you navigate differing sex drives and bodily changes over the years in a long-term relationship or marriage? I am perimenopausal and have no sex drive anymore. My husband still does, and I feel like I'm letting him down by never being in the mood.
Wow. Yeah. And this is an interesting thing in relationships, because I think that happens for lots of different reasons in couples. The reason that she mentioned there is a common one, where it happens when women go into menopause. And I feel like number one is answering that question of what is sex for you, right? And redefining what does it mean? And can you play with that a little bit and play with it with your partner in terms of, what is it that you really want? What is it that they really want? And open up a dialogue about it, and just have the conversation. And this is half the battle, having the conversation and having the communication about it, right? So once we've sort of broadened the idea of what sex is, and then we start having the conversations, we can just kind of loosen up, again, like it talked about, one of the components of magnificent sex is the focus on pleasure rather than on performance. And when we hear that, I think we often think of men when we hear performance, right? But also for women, like, okay, so I'm not lubricating like I used to, right? And maybe I don't really feel like it. And what does that mean? Well, maybe it just is what it is, right? And again, back to like not making it mean anything about you or about him or about the relationship, about whether or not there's love there. Yeah. And I think there are ways to get that back if we want to, in terms of the desire and the sex drive. Some of it is hormonal, and we can watch our own hormone cycles and see, okay, is there a cycle that's still happening for you, right, in your body in terms of desire, right? So is it never? Do you never ever want sex? It's like, I feel like too, sometimes we get into this thing of, we feel like it's our partner's responsibility to turn us on. And it's not. It's our responsibility, right? And when we've kind of been in that, or we've been in a rut for a while, and we're just not engaging, it can be easy to think that I just don't want sex anymore. But actually, if we begin to engage in pleasure, in just the sensations in the body, physical pleasure, right? Maybe it's just you throw a fur coat on the bed and you lay down on it. It might be as simple as that, right? And just pleasure, and allowing ourselves to just re-engage on that level. And at first, maybe not with the partner, maybe just alone, right? And then expanding that possibly to the self-pleasure, and see what happens for you.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think it's really normal for people to go up and down with their sex drive throughout life, right? Throughout many different things happening. And I think it's part of society's conditioning that we need to be having sex like at least this many times to have a normal functioning relationship, or whatever it may be. And I love that you introduced like having that playful flirting maybe with your partner that's like outside of like just penetration, you know? And like, again, I've hardly even thought of it like that before, but that is something that me personally, I like to have like a flirty fun, like, you know, when you're anticipating. And I think that's so important to bring in as a part of like a sexual experience for sure. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Playfulness is super fun, right? It's just
Yes.
fun. It's
Right.
play.
Exactly. And it should be fun. It should be fun. All right. So our next question is, I'm 2.5 years sober, and it was and still is hard for me to get in the mood and have sex sober. My husband wants sex daily. We do communicate, and we have decided to have sex approximately every other day. How do I get in the mood and stay present during sex? What would you say to someone newly sober? Because this was even harder at the beginning of my recovery.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like sometimes, again, sex in recovery is challenging for all of us, especially when we're new in recovery, like she was talking about, because we haven't done it before. It's a brand new thing and it's super vulnerable. And I think especially, for a woman who is allowing someone to enter her body, like, can it get more vulnerable than that? So yeah, I think really honoring that, honoring your vulnerability and being present with that and communicating that to our partners. And then asking yourself, what do you need to feel safe? Because a lot of this is about, we need to feel safe. Yeah. And that was a lot of the reason why we were acting out with drugs and alcohol, is because we didn't feel safe in some way and we needed to relax. And this is a huge, huge part of, as she called it, getting in the mood, is just relaxing, right? So you can try different things and see, okay, does it help you relax if you take a hot shower before? Does it help you relax if he gives you a massage? Does it help you relax if you take the pressure off and you say, we're gonna just have sex, when we both feel like it, right? Trying different things like that and just seeing what helps you relax, what helps you feel safe, and being really open to communicating that with your partner. And it sounds like the communication is already there because they're making agreements, right? They're negotiating. And just continuing that, I think the communication part is really super important.
Agreed. Communication is key for sure. Thank you. All right. Our next question is, what if we are afraid to be intimate because we are then flooded with in love like emotions and begin to move too quickly after sexual experience with someone we like? I fear I confuse sex with love, if that makes sense.
Oh, does it ever make sense? These are my people. I love you people. Yes, absolutely makes sense. So go slow. Go really, really, really painfully slow as molasses. This is the number one thing, right? And many times what we want to do is we want to rush through that beginning part of a relationship to the physical intimacy. And sharing our bodies with someone is incredibly vulnerable. And before we get to that, there's a lot that we can share before that, right? But what we want to do is we want to fast forward the clock and just get there because we're scared, because we're nervous, right? Which is, of course, we're nervous and scared, like totally normal. And can we begin to sit with those fears and just go really, really slow? I feel like what I do with a lot of my clients is about creating a dating plan, right? Or a personal empowerment plan, which includes a dating plan. So it's about, 5 different circles of awareness where we decide, okay, these are the things that I absolutely can't do. And maybe for this person, one of the things that they absolutely can't do is have sex with someone that they don't trust yet, that they don't feel intimately, emotionally connected to yet. And here's the thing, though, sometimes, like we talked about, intensity is not the same as intimacy, right? And that's what's going on here, because the sexuality can create the intensity. But if you haven't built the trust, you haven't built the relationship, you haven't built the emotional intimacy, and then you have these feelings of being in love because there's dopamine and, the bonding, oxytocin, the bonding hormone that happens when we have sex. That is powerful stuff. I'm going to tell you a story. One time, I met this guy. I was test driving cars. Secret way to meet men. And I met this guy. And so I don't know, like a week later, I went out on a date with him and I brought him home with me. And I was really young in my recovery. And he was okay. And like, I liked him and, hadn't had sex in a while. So I decided to have sex with him. And suddenly I was obsessed. And I was like, what? I didn't like him that much. He's a car salesman. Like, what am I doing here? Right. I didn't even understand what was going on, but I never forgot that lesson because my body was showing me, hey, this other stuff is going on here that I didn't really have control over. It was just biological. And so I had to start going really, really slow and have a plan for, okay, how many times do I need to go on a date with someone before I can have sex with them? And what do I need to have in place before I can have sex with them? What's going to feel safe for me based on my own patterns, my own cycles, and what I see in my history.
Wonderful. So many good nuggets of information and recommendations there. I think that's super helpful and very common situation that I think a lot of us can relate to. All right. So our next question is, when I was in active alcohol addiction, I feel like I used sex to disassociate. I have been in the same relationship for 7 years and quit drinking 4 years ago. I now feel like I jumped to the opposite side of sexual anorexia. I'm having a hard time figuring out what actual sober intimacy means to me. I don't feel like having sex, and sadly, my partner doesn't understand my challenges. So this causes tension within our relationship. Do you have any suggestions how I can find my balance?
Yeah. So this goes back to what we talked about of the pendulum swings, right? All or nothing. So it's really common. There's, you're not broken. And I absolutely believe that you can find your way again. And it's going to require, some work. I feel like this is where Tantra can be really helpful because it can help us get back into our bodies. And with the dissociation, this is part of the issue, is that we've gone outside of our bodies because it didn't feel safe to be in our bodies at some point, right? And so we didn't want to be in there. And that makes sense, right? Because when we're drinking and using, especially with drugs and alcohol, we don't have any boundaries. But our skin is the first boundary, right? Like this is the container. This is the skin we're in. It's our first boundary, the first boundary that we're aware of in life, really. And so as we begin to reintegrate and develop new boundaries, like actual boundaries out there in the world with other people as well, sometimes it's challenging to know and to become re-embodied. So some of the ways that you can get back into your body, like we talked about, there are embodiment practices. There's a lot of great stuff out there, but the simplest, easiest one I know of is shaking. Just like 5 minutes every morning, get up, put on some music, preferably music that doesn't have lyrics, and you just shake your body. Just shake your body like this and do it for a few minutes. And it doesn't have to go with the rhythm of the music. Shake yourself around, keep your feet planted, hip width apart on the floor, and just shake your body. And then with the last couple of minutes while you're doing it, really let yourself get free. And if sounds want to come out or breaths want to come out or tears or laughter, whatever comes, like just let it come. And this is one way, when you see animals after they've been attacked and they survived an attack, you'll watch them walking away and they'll go like this. And they're shaking it off. Like literally, that's what I'm telling you to do. Shake it off, like T Swift said.
Wonderful. Yeah, This is going to sound silly, but I never realized how important like our connection to our bodies are in recovery, including sex and recovery. And everything is a somatic experience, and that things like She Recovers yoga and dance and just moving our bodies really help to bring us back in connection with the mind, body, and spirit, which does affect things like our sexual experiences. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. We had one question come through on Facebook about one of your courses, which was, can Canadians do the Love Him or Leave Him mini course?
Why, yes, of course, Canadians can do the Love Him or Leave Him mini course.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is something that I created in response to. I've just had, especially in the last 3 years, a lot of people coming to me because they're in a relationship. They're not sure if they should stay or if they should go, and they're really struggling. So it's 3 modules: clarity, confidence, and courage. And it's essentially designed to help you find the clarity, confidence, and courage you need so that you can make a choice that you won't regret. So it's really just a deep exploration of that. Then I think it only takes about maybe 6 hours to complete the whole thing. And it's really easy to sign up for online, and it's $39. So
awesome. Great. Sounds like a great tool for our community. Awesome. Let's go to another question. Can you speak to toxic sexual adventures and why they may be so enticing sometimes? How can we avoid them?
Yes, I can. I feel like this is so interesting. I love your questions, y'all. You're amazing. I love you guys. So yeah, first of all, what makes it toxic? And then I also, well, sort of, so here's the thing. Taboo is what lust is about, right? That idea of, oh, I shouldn't, but I want to, right? This is where lust comes from. And love comes from someplace else completely. And we want, we have this ideal that we see, in TV and film that I want to have both of those in the same person every time. You know what I mean? I want to have super hot sex with the guy who brings me chocolates on Valentine's Day. And and sometimes we do get to have that. And sometimes, we have that and then it goes away and then it comes back and, who knows? There are lots of different cycles in relationships, but my point is when it comes to that lust, it's about things that are taboo. And so it makes sense that we want what we can't have, or we want the thing that's forbidden, the forbidden fruit, right? Like, we didn't invent this yesterday. I think what makes it toxic is when we're repeating patterns that, of trauma, of past trauma. So, for example, if we look at Sex in the City, and here's a great example. So there's the main character, Carrie, for those of you who don't remember Sex in the City, and there's this guy that she's always in and out of relationship with. His name is Big. They could have used the Love Him or Leave Him course. Carrie would have, but there would only be 1 season. So what makes this relationship toxic is that she keeps taking him back, right? Like, she knows, and she just keeps taking him back. That's what makes it toxic. So I think, how can we avoid them? Awareness, acceptance, and action, right? So the first thing is we have the awareness of, okay, this thing I'm doing is toxic. And then acceptance of like, okay, so this is what I'm doing, and really coming to a point of accepting where you're at with it, not beating yourself up and judging yourself for that, not shaming yourself, and then taking some action, right? And taking action, oftentimes it's helpful to have accountability when you're taking action. And this is where coaches can be helpful. This is where gatherings can be helpful. Mentors, therapists can be helpful in terms of taking action that's going to support you moving towards the kind of relationship that you do want to have.
Wonderful. Yes. Okay. Another question that came through is, how can I work through my limiting beliefs I have around sex?
Interesting. I'm so curious what the limiting beliefs are. Well, I feel like this, first of all, start with that sexual health inventory, taking a look at that and just being willing to go and fill out some questions and look on, on paper, like, here's where I'm at right now. And like I was saying before, taking little tiny risks, we don't necessarily have to just like suddenly be Emily Morse. You know what I mean? Like we can just take a tiny step in terms of those limiting beliefs, and also looking a little deeper. Where do those limiting beliefs begin? Where do they come from? They're there for a reason. Do you believe that they're protecting you from something? What are they protecting you from? Is that real? Right? Is it something that maybe worked for you at one time that isn't working anymore? And then how willing are you to let go of it? Right? So I think all of those are questions that one could ask oneself, especially once, if you look at the sexual health inventory and then you go back and you say, okay, where did some of these attitudes begin? Then you can start asking those deeper questions about where you can go from here.
Awesome. Yes, I agree. I think everyone can start with the sexual health inventory. And that kind of goes into what I think would be our last question, unless anybody has any other ones that they want to bring forward. This one was just, what's one thing we can do today to start to explore our levels of sexual intimacy? So what is one thing we can do today to explore our levels of sexual intimacy?
Well, I mean, again, the sexual health inventory is exactly meant for that. Like, that's what I created it for. It's super simple. And it's a tiny baby step. I think if you take that step and you want to go a little bit further, I would invite you to engage, and maybe you can even do this with a couple of friends, right? In some sort of an embodiment practice, whether it's you're going to go to Taryn's yoga, or you're going to go to Peyton's dance thing, or if you want to try some breath work, if you want to try some tantric breathing, like even just there's the Ujjayi breathing is really great, which is just you breathe with your mouth open, and you sort of, it's like you're like if you have a mirror and you're trying to fog the mirror, so you breathe like that. Sounds kind of sexy too. So yeah, some really simple practices like that I think can be helpful. But just, I think the embodiment is a great place to begin.
Wonderful. Okay, I think we covered so many things today, and it was so informational. I think we'll be thinking about this session for a long time, and everyone will be exploring their sexual health and intimacy, I hope. Thank you very much for being here today, Dufflin. Thank you for your time and your experience. And thank you to everyone who makes this series possible. And most importantly, to all of our viewers for showing up today and holding space and bringing forward your awesome questions. We truly are stronger together. I just want to say that tonight we have our Galentine's Day extended online gathering. For those of you that want to join that, we'll be on Zoom from 5 to 8 p.m. Pacific time. And I am facilitating the last hour of that. So please join us, and we'll be together celebrating recovery, self-love, and all the wonderful things about our community. Next Monday, for Mental Health Monday, we have Dr. Mikkel Harris, and she'll be helping us learn about grief as self-care. To learn more about Mental Health Monday and all of our upcoming sessions, please visit sherecovers.org/Mental Health Mondays. For more information about the She Recovers Foundation and all of our recovery-focused programs, resources, and touch points, please visit sherecovers.org.